newsroom and powered by DemeraraWaves.com.
Good day with your major newscast. I am Jessica Daw-Sam. First with the highlights. A trade union has started to pressure government to approve a new minimum wage. The Private Sector Commission wants spares to be on standby in Guyana to avoid excess gas flaring. In the region, rice farmers in Suriname are hoping to find a solution to low paddy prices. An international law enforcement team has seized more than $200 million worth of narcotics in the Caribbean Sea. And internationally, Ukraine says it will take steps to see if alleged war crimes have been committed in Russia. The details of these stories and more in just a moment.
Advertise with us on News Talk Radio Guyana 103.1 FM for best coverage on programs on motivation, beauty and health, parenting and relationships, knowing your rights, and a variety of enlightening content, and get value for your money. Call our helpful staff today on 223-1056 or 223-1041 today.
Now for the news in detail. As the price of basic goods and services continue to increase, the Guyana Workers Union GAU has begun agitating for the government to keep its promise to increase the minimum salary to $60,000 per month. GAU President Norris Witter says the former A Partnership for National Unity plus Alliance for Change, APNU plus AFC, had decided to increase the minimum salary from $40,400 per month to $60,000. He says after the People's Progressive Party returned to office in 2020, the Tri-Party Committee of Labor, Government, and the Employer met and agreed that Labor Minister Joseph Hamilton would take the proposed increase to Cabinet. Mr. Twitter says that since then, Mr. Hamilton has refused to sign the order.
He faithfully reported to the Tripartite Committee later in February 2022 that he took the matter to Cabinet. Cabinet accepted the recommendation and that all that has to be done was for him, the minister, to sign that order to bring into effect the new national minimum wage of $60,000 per month. As the nation will know and the world will know, up to this point in time as we speak, that order has not been signed to make good the commitment of that $60,000 per month.
But Labour Minister Hamilton has denied telling the Tri-Party Committee that all that is left to be done is for the order to be signed.
I've never said that.
So still before Cabinet.
I'm around a long time. I've never said that.
All right.
Go back. All the statements I've made is one consistent statement on the matter.
The Labour Minister says the request for the increase in the minimum wage is still before Cabinet. GAU President says that back in 2019, when the Tri-Party Committee had agreed that the minimum salary should be $60,000 per month, the cost of living had not spiraled.
When the decision was taken in 2019, it was taken consistent with what the cost of living was at that point in time. And it was even pointed out to members of the committee that while it is recognized that $60,000 is not adequate enough to compensate for the cost of living as it were in 2019, at least the $60,000 marks a beginning to address the deficit of the minimum wage vis-a-vis the cost of living.
GAU President Norris Witter. He says his union which has been holding weekly picketing demonstrations outside Parliament building, plans to seek the solidarity of other trade unions to intensify its demand for the minimum wage order to be signed so that workers can earn at least $60,000 per month. After that is done, he hopes that the tri-party committee can begin negotiations for a new figure due to increased cost of living. The trade union movement and the private sector want more to be done to improve safety at the workplace. They issued the calls at the start of Occupational Safety and Health Month. General Secretary of the Guyana Trades Union Congress, Lincoln Lewis, not only wants the employers' organization, Consultative Association of Guyanese Industry, to be involved. He says the Ministry of Labor's occupational safety and health inspectors must enforce the law.
We cannot have a situation where when you finish here, when workers turned up at the workplaces, and when the conditions are not favorable, when the workers stand up consistent with the law and say we will not work under it, you have the employers, some employers who say you have to go home, or we suspend them, or we do something to them, right? And the Labor Department lack the capacity to go and enforce the law and make sure that those employers respect what the law says and what the workers agree involved in.
Collective labor agreements.
Many employers who also signed that agreement have little interest in health and safety. They have more interest in gaining profits off of the back of the workers. Primarily because right here in this city, inspections are not done properly, and workers have to work under some very difficult conditions. And even though protective clothing is enshrined in the agreement, it is not enforced.
But Labour Minister Joseph Hamilton says that the number of labour officers and occupational safety officers has increased over the past 18 months. However, he says a number of trade unions has not been representing workers properly.
Many instances, this minister had to intervene to deal with companies that were taking advantage of our brothers and sisters. And you know, what is aggravating to all of that is that the workers, they have a union who collect union dues from them every week or every month. How do you explain that workers are paying union dues every day, every week, every month to their representative, and yet they are unable to get justice from the employer?
Labour Minister Joseph Hamilton. The Private Sector Commission, PSC, wants spares for floating production, storage and offloading vessels to be located in Guyana to minimize the flaring of natural gas. The business organization says a contingency plan should include having items such as a spare compressor to address mechanical failures and so reduce gas emissions to approved levels. 2 years ago, the flash gas compressor aboard the oil production vessel Liza Destiny had resulted in excess gas flaring. Eventually, the ExxonMobil controlled Esso Exploration and Production Guyana Limited had been granted approval to flare the gas to maintain oil production levels, but had been fined for the pollution. At the same time, the PSC welcomes the decision by the Environmental Protection Agency for a capping stack to be brought to Guyana to seal a well if there is a blowout. Now for the news in the region. Rice farmers in Suriname say they are depending on the government there to save the sector. Star News reports that their major concern is the low price that millers are paying them for paddy. The price has dropped from $22.92 to $19.30 per bale. A government delegation led by Minister Albert Ramdin Van Bibis has not been able to achieve a satisfactory solution in Nikeri. Chairman of the Suriname Paddy Farmers Association, Harinandan Omira, says his organization has all the calculations and hopes for a breakthrough in further talks on Tuesday. 3 parliamentarians and a Nikeri District Commissioner, Senorita Gobarhan, have promised to support the farmers at a time when they are harvesting paddy. In Brazil, heavy rains caused mudslides that killed at least 14 people in southern coastal cities and an area of Rio de Janeiro state. State and local officials say that rescuers answered 850 calls in the last 24 hours and were able to bring 144 people to safety in the affected regions. Rio de Janeiro has been hit by inclement weather over the past few weeks. Landslides and flooding in February killed some 240 people in Petropolis area in the hills above Rio de Janeiro, authorities said on March 23. The mayor of the town of Paraty said at least 70 persons were homeless. He said mudslides blocked streets and isolated parts of the city, and entire neighborhoods were without electricity in the colonial coastal town that is a tourist attraction. And lastly, in the region, the United States Coast Guard says it has seized more than $243 million in illegal narcotics during an operation in the Caribbean Sea. The Coast Guard says that the crew of its cutter, Dauntless, seized about 88,500 pounds of cocaine and apprehended 13 suspected drug smugglers with Dominican Republic and Colombian nationalities. The operation lasted 45 days. The U.S. Coast Guard said the Dauntless crew worked alongside multiple U.S. Coast Guard assets and international assets, including a Dutch Navy ship, to interdict the illegal drug smuggling ventures. Lieutenant Paul Puddington, a District 7 duty enforcement officer, says he and his team are thankful for coordinated efforts across the U.S. Coast Guard, the Department of Defense, Customs and Border Protection, as well as their international partners from the Netherlands and throughout Central and South America. And here now is your international news from the BBC.
Hello, I'm David Harper with the BBC News. President Biden has called for a war crimes trial against Russia's President Vladimir Putin. It follows reports of alleged atrocities by Russian troops in the Ukrainian town of Bucha outside the capital Kiev. Speaking to journalists, the American president said his past comments on Mr. Putin had been vindicated.
You may remember I got criticized for calling Putin a war criminal. Well, the truth of the matter, you saw what happened in Bucha. This warrants him, he is a war criminal. But we have to gather the information. We have to continue to provide Ukraine with the weapons they need to continue the fight. And we have to gather all the detail so this can be have a war crime trial.
The UN's human rights chief, Michelle Bachelet, has been among those condemning the images that have emerged from Bucha. Ukraine's President Zelensky has been visiting the area. Here's Anna Foster.
President Volodymyr Zelensky has been to Bucha today to examine that road which has now seen pictures really spread around the world of twisted and broken Russian tanks. He talked about war crimes, as he saw it, war crimes committed by Russian soldiers before they left and withdrew from these towns and settlements around Kiev. He also, in response to a question from the BBC, said that this would not derail peace talks. He said that it was important to still try and pursue peace militarily, diplomatically. He said that would continue.
Wearing a bulletproof vest and surrounded by Ukrainian soldiers, Mr. Zelensky told journalists that Russian troops will be held accountable.
What you see around you, what happened to this town, is characteristic of the Russian military, which treated people worse than animals. It is a war crime, and it will be recognized by the world as genocide.
European election observers say that Hungary's election, though well run, was marred by the lack of a level playing field for candidates. Sunday's vote saw the right-wing nationalist Prime Minister Viktor Orbán win a fourth term in office. A UN report on climate change due to be published shortly is expected to warn that rapid systemic transformation across all areas of society can prevent total climate breakdown. Our science correspondent Victoria Gill explains.
This is the third of three reports. We've had the what is the state of climate change, in what is the impact of climate change, and this is the what can we do. So what we're expecting is a plan from the UN about what we will need to do in order to address this problem. The key thing with this is that we're a couple of years into what's already been called a critical decade, by the end of which we need to make deep slashes in greenhouse gas emissions, to be cutting carbon emissions in half by the end of this decade. So, time is running out.
World news from the BBC. 2 oil tankers are now in the Yemeni port of Hodeidah as a 2-month ceasefire that started on Saturday continues to hold. Sebastian Usher reports.
This is the first step in the alleviation of the air and sea blockade that the Saudi-led coalition has enforced on areas controlled by Houthi rebels since 2016. The oil tankers will help provide some relief to the fuel crisis in Yemen. 18 such ships are scheduled to dock in the next 2 months at Hodeidah, which is the main entry point for essential goods and supplies for the majority of Yemenis. 2 commercial flights a week will also be permitted in and out of the capital Sana'a, which is controlled by the Houthis.
The Deputy Prime Minister of Lebanon has admitted that the state and the central bank are bankrupt. Saadeh al-Shemi said that the losses incurred will be shared between those involved, including the state, the central bank, the banks and the Lebanese people. For the past 2 years, the Lebanese economy has been suffering its biggest collapse in decades. As Lebanon's chief negotiator with the IMF, Mr. Shemi is one of the key politicians involved in trying to tackle the crisis. Inflation in Turkey leapt to a new 20-year high in March, reaching an annual rate of over 61%. Onur Erem reports.
Price tags on supermarket shelves change every week. Increasing energy and commodity prices linked to the war in Ukraine have driven the latest rise, but many are also blaming the unorthodox interest rate policies of President Erdogan. He argues that cutting interest rates will reduce inflation, but so far that hasn't happened in Turkey. People wait in the long queues in the snow to buy bread, while those who would normally holiday abroad are staying at home. And there's no expectation things will improve soon, with experts predicting even higher levels of inflation in the coming months.
Onur Erem from the BBC Turkish service. And that's the latest. BBC News.
And that was your international news. Here now is a recap of your highlights. A trade union has started to pressure government to approve a new minimum wage. The Private Sector Commission wants spares to be on standby in Guyana to avoid excess gas flaring. In the region, rice farmers in Suriname are hoping to find a solution to low paddy prices. An international law enforcement team has seized more than $200 million worth of narcotics in the Caribbean Sea. And internationally, Ukraine says it will take steps to see if alleged war crimes have been committed in Russia. And that was your major newscast. I am Jessica Dawson.
This has been the news, compiled in the News Talk Radio newsroom. For ongoing updates, visit demerarawaves.com you can check facebook.com/demwaves and twitter.com/demwaves.